Welcome everybody and thank you for joining today's webinar. Today's program is being recorded. Any views expressed in this webinar are for general educational purposes only and do not represent any official views or positions of sponsoring or presenters organizations. We are looking forward to your questions at the end of the program. Please submit them anytime using the Q&A section. Greetings and welcome to today's educational program, Fundraising and Quality Management, a perfect partnership for mission impact by Abigayle Tobia. This is your moderator, Shobha Mittal from ASQ Quality Management Division. Today, we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Abigayle Tobia. Please join me in welcoming her. Abigayle has served as Verlin's Vice President of Philanthropy since 2021. She leads the philanthropy, external communications, and volunteer engagement efforts. Throughout her more than 20 years of fundraising experience, Abigayle has raised millions of dollars for a variety of organizational missions. She currently serves as the president-elect for the Association of Fundraising Professionals of Western Pennsylvania. Prior to joining Verland, Abigayle led the North Allegheny Foundation as executive director. In that role, she quadrupled the funds raised, developed and the alumni engagement program, implemented a comprehensive fundraising program, and established a board of trustees reflective of the community. Abigayle has played a vital role in the fundraising team for the Cherokee National Historical Society, Girl Scouts Western Pennsylvania, and Price Towers Arts Center. Abigayle is a certified fundraising executive and one of the few professionals in the field to hold a master's degree in nonprofit management, which she earned from Regis University. Abigayle has received her bachelor's in social work with an emphasis in juvenile studies from the University of Iowa. Abigayle regularly presents at regional and national conferences, including events hosted by National School Foundation Association, Association of Pennsylvania Education Foundations, Erie Nonprofit Partnership, Alpha Phi Omega, Girl Scouts of the USA, and the Association of Fundraising Professionals of Western Pennsylvania. And so, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Abigayle Tobia. Abigayle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shobha. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm so excited to share with you my experience in fundraising and how we can marry the two, fundraising and quality management, to really make an impact for the missions and the organizations that we serve. So there we go. So just so that we are all working from the same framework that was on the flyer, today we're going to discuss how outcome measurements and data can impact fundraising, finding that right balance of storytelling and data telling, and then really what our funders look for most in quality management as we work together to hit that right note. So I wanted to start with really level setting. How do we fundraise? What are our current industry trends in the fundraising field, and how can outcome measurements and data impact our fundraising efforts? So fundraising is more than special events and grant writing. And if you are a quality management professional, I am sure that grant writing is one of the areas that you get pulled into the most. Foundations and large grants such as state and federal grants are often more complex and often have space where the funders want to hear about either quality management, quality assurance, or outcome measurements. But fundraising is really more than grant writing. And we have a variety of strategies that we work with. And there are places where quality management can be a partner throughout those conversations. Really, partnering with your fundraiser is about finding those nuggets of data points or those talking points that is the right for that solicitation strategy. So the information that we're trying to package for perhaps a direct mail piece might be slightly different than a multi-channel solicitation or a capital campaign solicitation. And it's really about having that two-way conversation about what are our donors looking for when before they make a gift. And really, how can we build trust with them, with our quality management professionals within the organization, to reassure them that we're not telling them a story, that it really is substance and trust there in a two-way relationship. So the Fundraising Effectiveness Project is a partnership of the Association of Fundraising Professionals Foundation for Philanthropy And every quarter, they pull data from our CRM systems within the fundraising industry and analyze it and look for trends. And where the industry stands now is we've actually continued to see a drop in total philanthropic dollars since 2021. This is in large part because we hit a peak during the pandemic that a lot of our donors responded to that need and that crisis situation. And as a whole, as an industry, nonprofits really struggle with donor retention. And so there were donors who were either moved to give because of the crisis in their community, or organizations were asking more with a very concrete request for support at that time. And we've seen this, on the boots on the ground fundraising, that there are definitely foundations who are willing to support very specific COVID-related either expenses or programs, or understood that some programs needed to be modified during the pandemic and during restrictions. But we weren't able to retain all of those donors or all of those donations as we've come out of the pandemic. There's an overall decline in donors. Again, a drop year over year, not only in the donors, but also in the donations. And we're seeing it in large part to those donors contributing less than $500. So we would call those our entry-level donors, or our low donors, and our mid-level donors. We are seeing it offset by our mega donors, such as the Mackenzie Scott and other very large donors who are giving through other vehicles to organizations. But as a whole, we still really worry about donor retention and the continued decline of philanthropy dollars in our community. An interesting point, though, is that often when fundraising trends are becoming a little bit worrisome, large organizations are able to weather the storm a little bit better than smaller organizations. But we're seeing that flip this time. We're actually seeing smaller nonprofits being able to stabilize a little bit faster than our large partner organizations. That may be in part because of the economic pressures that are affecting individual donor giving. And that ratio, that right ratio, or maybe it's because our smaller nonprofits have developed very meaningful relationships with their donors in ways that our larger nonprofits kind of go through some churn, and that is becoming a reflection of their donor retention rates. So we continue to keep an eye on these concerning trends. The Giving USA data is a picture from our IRS reporting data. So there's always about an 18-month delay. So the 2022 Giving USA data reminds us again that the largest contribution, the largest portion of philanthropic dollars comes from individual donors. They're at $319 billion in 2022. We as experienced fundraisers know that individual donors is not only where the growth for an organization is, but also where your most reliable supporters come from. We often kind of play to this scenario of, if my organization was facing a really great opportunity tomorrow, who could I go to that would be able to donate $20, $30, or $40,000 and really make that decision after I've shared the opportunity with them, and I could walk out perhaps with a donation in hand. And the fact is that that's not your corporations and that's not your foundations. Those are your individual donors who can respond quickly in the case of a crisis or an opportunity. Even when we take into consideration bequests, and some corporations and foundations are actually just complex tax structures for individual donors, such as a corporation as a sole proprietorship, or a foundation that was established but really is a small family foundation. So that individual part of the chart there is probably closer to 65 to 70% of philanthropic decisions are made at the individual level. Then on the other side here, we talk about where that money is going. So religion continues to be the largest receiver of philanthropic dollars in the United States. It can be both houses of worship, but also affiliated services to those parent organizations. Another trend that was very interesting is often education is the next one on that chart. So the fact that education really is starting to flip-flop with human services is something that we're watching. And so in the education field, we think of not only universities and university endowments, but also parochial schools and private schools. So the human service and education has started to become very close, and that's something that we're keeping our eye on. So looking forward to 2024 and what we as fundraisers are really looking for as emerging trends in the fundraising field. Major gift fundraising continues to be where we put the majority of our energy and our relationship building. Again, because that's within the best interest of our organization in the times of great need or great opportunity, but also because those are the donors who can make big decisions to fund programming with any scope. So if we have a really strange request that doesn't fit a foundation or a corporate scope of work, our individuals are the ones that can often provide that flexibility. There's an unstable giving environment, especially as it relates to economic pressures. So as inflation has hit our donors and our organizations, that has impacted not only the funding gap that we're trying to breach, as well as the discretionary funds available to our donors. And we do see that. There's been a lot of talk in the fundraising field about, well, if it really costs us 10% more to offer the same programs, are we packaging our ask to donors and asking them to cover 10% more? And then in addition to that, our donors are seeing the unease. And I'm in the Pittsburgh area, and we definitely felt that a year ago. It was interesting. We had our events a year ago in the fall, and we're preparing for them in the fall. And we were fine in last August. But by the time we got to October and September, I was starting to see some corporations maybe not come through with sponsorships, or maybe hesitate before committing to an event, or maybe just sending a foursome and not doing a sponsorship. And I started checking in with my peers in the same market, and they were seeing the same things, that all of our donors were starting to feel a little iffy about the economic pressures within our community. And it was a little weird because it was a little bit delayed from what the national pressures were. By the fall, nationally, we were feeling a lot more stable, and we weren't worried as much about recession. But our particular market had been delayed about 3 months, and our donors were starting to feel that. And then we're also seeing that multiple generations of donors require different strategies. So for quite a while, we could kind of guarantee that once a donor reached that 50, 55, 60-year-old range, they would prefer written communications. That's about the time that our donors really preferred receiving paper newsletters, paper impact studies, that we could paper direct mail. That was a pretty safe segment that was not really engaged digitally or through other communication channels. And that's not what we're seeing anymore. Now, our donors, as they age, are still remaining digitally engaged as they reach that threshold, which means we're also competing with other digital messages. We're also seeing the opposite at the younger end of our donors. Our younger donors are requiring us to communicate with them in other ways. So we have to start thinking about how we communicate to a younger generation via text to give versus an older generation that we would normally send them paper, that now we might need to be working on a multi-channel, a Facebook push, or other methodologies. And so we're having to segment a little bit more on those age demographics and being a little bit more thoughtful about being respectful of our donor communications. There we go. So we're also seeing a decline in trust in nonprofits. So the Edelman's Trust Barometer continues to measure that donors are losing trust in nonprofits. And that can be very deflating. You can think, oh my gosh, my nonprofit, we've been yelling, I call it echoing into the cave, right? That we're just spewing out communications. We keep talking about all the wonderful things that are happening and nobody's listening. In fact, even today, I sent an email with a really amazing thank you video from our donors to our staff. And I sent it out and I sat there for an hour and 3 people had watched it. And I'm sitting there going, I spent so much time thinking about the wording that I had in that email and trying to make it warm and inviting. And I really want people to hear this message. And it just getting people to take that pause and click on that link is becoming harder and harder. We are also seeing, we have seen for a while the sensationalization of nonprofit scandals in the media. And there was a wonderful movie that came out last fall called Uncharitable by Dan Paletta. And he has a TED Talk as well that's a little bit older, but he's a great pioneer in this idea that we have to stop having the discussion about the overhead of nonprofits Because the more we invest in growth, the more we invest in fundraising, the bigger the impact and the more people we can serve. And there's not a magical ratio as to when that is healthy versus unhealthy. But the media will pick up on these stories, these scandals, and never really come back to tell the real story when it's proven that there really wasn't a scandal, or that whatever decisions were made were with full transparency, even if it wasn't clear to the news media. So we are working as an industry to continue to be not only more transparent in our financial plan reporting with our 990s and our impact reports, but also really trying to break through with smart digital communications and really personalizing those communications. So we are fighting with Target, we're fighting with Best Buy, we're fighting with all the other digital communication streams to get our message through so we can continue to build that trust. Nathan Chappell and Brian Crims and Michael Ashley wrote a book in the last 18 months-ish on the generosity crisis. And their research really shows that if things continue to downward spiral, that the number of Americans who are giving philanthropically could really decline below 10% in the next 50 years. Because we continue to have fewer and fewer Americans who are really engaged in philanthropy. And philanthropy is different than charity, because charity is like the $5 that you give at the checkout to the food bank, but the food bank doesn't know who you are. They can't actually thank you. And it's the grocery store that has made this very transactional relationship with you. And you feel good because you gave money, and the grocery store looks good because they're facilitating this charity and they get to claim they've helped raise money. But there really isn't a relationship between the consumer and the organization that leads to a building fundraising relationship. But philanthropy is when we make that gift that kind of hurts, that we have to sit down with our partner, our spouse, to talk about before we write that big check. What is that threshold where you're like, well, if I charge that to the card, or if I write that check, my spouse or my partner might ask questions. So whatever that level is for you, that's where philanthropy really starts. So what is the solution to all of these crises? We have to add more donor personalization to our fundraising strategies, and we have to build more donor educations with new donor welcome series. And this is something I discovered at the organization that I'm with now at Verland. For decades, we thought, if I build a really great case for support, if I really tell our story really well, and I share that story with donors or potential donors, and I do it well enough, then they donate, and then they're committed to my organization. And what we're really seeing is that donors are really more committed to a cause. They really care about breast cancer or ending hunger or human rights. And they're less concerned with which organization they're supporting. And they kind of feel like if there's a crisis and I give to perhaps Salvation Army one year and American Red Cross the next year, or my local disaster relief agency the third year, it's really all the same because I'm giving the same amount to the same cause. But it's not the same to the organizations who are trying to plan their budget and provide services. It's a donor loss. So we now work on new donor education. So we assume that you've made a donation because you know about a little part of my organization, or maybe because you're giving in honor or in memory of someone who loved my organization, but that you yourself don't actually know 90% of what we do. And so we set up an email series that automatically goes out over 6 to 8 weeks, really engaging you in the stories from all the different components that the organization has. And the intention is that when you reach that 1 year mark of your annual fund, or when we ask you for money again, or we invite you to our next event, that then you have fallen in love and heard that case for support. So now we're really moving on to finding that right balance of storytelling and data telling. And I hope you love resources and data-driven decisions, because that's what I love about fundraising. I love that science behind it. So when we talk about quality management and fundraising connecting, what we're really talking about is this in the donor cycle. And this is a methodology that all fundraisers kind of use some model of, that the donor cycle is identification, cultivation, solicitation, then appreciation. And then you kind of bring it on again, start again. And we do map out donor journeys, although there's a really great meme out there where it's like, this is what I think my donor journey is. And it's like one dog at the feed bowl. And in reality, it's all the dogs at the feed bowl at the same time. But we partner with our quality management teams on that cultivation, that learning and education before we solicit. So we kind of prove our case that we're successful before we ask them to support us. This is one of my favorite fundraising resources. I keep this printed out on my little bulletin board when I'm writing campaign materials. And this is originally by Leah Eustace and written by, and it was drawn by one of our colleagues. But there are a couple here that I want to point out to you where quality management and fundraising can really partner together. And the first one is number 10, avoiding asking for drops in the bucket. So when I work on making an ask, I can't ask folks or tell them that with their donation of $100 that they are solving world hunger. It just doesn't make sense. What I can tell them, though, is in their $100 donation, I apologize, I think my earring is perhaps knocking into my microphone there. So in our $100 donation, what we can tell folks, though, is that your $100 donation does make a difference in the lives of those it feeds. So for a $100 donation, we can now feed 5 more people. Or perhaps your $100 donation means that we can provide a roof or a shelter for 3 more people for 3 nights. So we need to build that impact to that donation level to that impact. We can't start with a capital campaign of $1 million and go to our $100 donors first. In fact, when we're talking about big campaigns, we often try to reach that 50% or 60% threshold before we even go into the public conversation. Because we need to have this perception that we've already reached a certain point and that my donation can actually get us to the end. And so when we're starting those big campaigns, we're starting with our lead donors. I also look to my quality management teams for number 8, that voice of authority, that we need to be able to say that we know the answers, that we know the challenges, that we know the opportunities for improvement, that we know the effectiveness of our programs. And all of that combined gives us the sense to donors that we truly are that voice of authority, that is, they truly care about hunger, youth development, homelessness, environmental protections, that truly the only way that they can help us and be a partner with us in this is if they are willing to join us as a volunteer, a donor in kind, or a cash donor. And then the tricky one for me that I love using is number setting, and that is using an anchor. So Bernard Ross, who's a next resource I'll share with you, has some great research on the neuroscience of fundraising. And he has this like parlor trick that he does in his workshops. And everyone, he goes up to folks kind of random and he says, pull a number of a hat or in a bag. And the number doesn't mean anything. It's just the record of your entry into this question. And then he tells you a story that you have to pick up a housewarming gift for someone, and all you can get at the local store is this bottle of wine. So how much would you be willing to pay for this bottle of wine? Well, the trick is that there are only 2 numbers in the bag, and the numbers are like 13 and 64. And if you pull the number 13 out of the bag, you are more likely on average to say that you'll pay up to $30 for that bottle of wine. But if you pull the number 64 out, you're more likely to pay up to $50 to $60 for that same bottle of wine and told the same story, because the number anchor was different. So as a fundraiser, we're constantly looking for ways to set a really great anchor number at the top of our email, at the top of our direct mail, as the first line in a letter to a grant cover letter for a grant. And that's where, if you as my quality management team can help me identify that really great number, that's impactful statement. And if we could find a number that says 87% of the people who go through this program are out of poverty within a year. 95% of the youth in our program report back that they have reduced suicidal thoughts. If we can find some number there that can increase my average donor rate, that is a great way for us to partner. So this is the resource from Bernard Ross and Claire Siegel in their book, Making the Ask Toolbox. And I know there's a lot of words on here, and you'll get the slide deck if you would like it so you can read through this. But the one where quality management and I partner is in this number 5 under proposal, line 2, building an equals MC story arc. So when we think about the MC story arc, we're talking about a matrix that says, the story I'm going to tell is either present or it's future. And it's either going to have a happy outcome or it's going to have a negative outcome. So if it's a happy right now story, it's an opportunity. But if it's a happy story for the future, it's a vision. And I would love to tell you that visions for an organization are the #1 fundraising story that we can tell. It's not. It just isn't. Unfortunately, we know from testing that the right now and sad story, the crisis, that's the one that raises the most money. So when my quality management teams and I are trying to tell these stories, sometimes we're trying to tell those crisis stories. And it may not even be within the organization. Maybe I need your help identifying what are the crises our community is facing. What is that level of poverty that we're trying to address? What is that level of hunger? How many people are coming to us every year? And what is the degree of crisis that they're in that needs to be addressed right now? And just so that nobody worries about what that fourth quadrant is, if it's in the future and it's a negative, it's considered a risk. And risk is really not an easy fundraising story because our donors can kind of justify that there's a slight percentage, a slight chance of that actually happening. So yeah, I want to make sure I didn't skip a slide there. So this is another area where our quality management teams and our fundraising teams can adjust our fundraising strategy based on the type of donor that we're working on. And Dan Heiss has been doing some leading research at the DAF Research Collaborative on donor-advised funds. And he has identified that there really are 3 types of donors who give to donor-advised funds. And donor-advised funds can be everything from a fund at a local community foundation to really one that's kept by Fidelity or Charles Schwab or PNC as their donor-advised funds. And the challenge for fundraisers is when you put it off on one of those for-profit banks who are managing the funds, it can be very hard to get from them the donor's name, the donor's information, how can we build that relationship. They really like to keep their donor information very private. It's not in that financial advisor's best interest to tell you who their donors are. So donors who use donor-advised funds actually fall into 3 kinds of categories: our tubs, tanks, and towers. So our tubs donors are ones that have really put 1 or 2 years worth of giving into their donor-advised fund, and they're looking at it as kind of an administrative ease, that I'm going to continue making $100 donations every month to the organizations I love, but that I'm going to just write 1 check to PNC and tell them to send the checks every month so I don't forget. Then we have our second type, which are tanks. And both of these donors may be thinking about it from a tax benefit situation where they may be thinking, if I make a large donations in 1 year, I might receive some tax benefits if I itemize my taxes because I've pooled that charitable donation into 1 tax year. So our tanks are really looking at it as maybe their legacy giving. They're 2 to 10 years of giving. They might be thinking, this is really what I want to be known for. I want to give really all of the giving I'm going to do, get that tax benefit in 1 fiscal year. Or maybe I want to give it to the organization, but I want to hold back and see how they progress over the next couple of years. So those tank donors respond better to our quality management, our outcome measurements, our true metrics, because they're keeping an eye on us over time. And then our towers are those who are really setting up multi-generational or family legacy. They're often what normally would have been registered as a family foundation or a small foundation, but the DAF offers them a little bit different administrative controls, a little bit less paperwork and headache, and a little bit more guarantee of ongoing management. So again, we're going to treat often those like a family foundation that may even have a grant application process. And finally, on this kind of segment, I believe, I wanted to tell you about the storytelling, fundraising, and planned giving. So Dr. Russell James is a prolific researcher and there's resources for all of us, but he has written 3 different free ebooks. He's written a lot, but these particular ones are free. You can download them as a digital book or listen to them as an audiobook. And he talks about the hero's journey from a fundraising perspective and planned giving. So for a planned giving donor, we think about them as our Luke Skywalker. That it's that same movie and book and literature trope, right? We've got this donor who is starting their journey of becoming a legacy donor. They've never made a major donation before, or they haven't made their bequest plans yet. So we, as the fundraisers, become their Obi-Wan Kenobi. We talk to them through the process. We help them find maybe the financial advisor or work with their legal team to find the structure of that. But really, the fundraiser or the nonprofit is taking that donor on the journey of discovery, of going into this unknown world, of finding their way, and then of helping them complete that journey as a changed person and returning to the known world. That they have to return to the rest of their community as a planned giving donor, as a major donor, as a well-known philanthropist and leader in the community. And so here are some resources. And those donors, when we are their sage, when we are their Obi-Wan Kenobi, that's where quality management can come in and help us tell that story, because those donors are being very thoughtful about the donations that they give. And we know that nonprofits that accept assets in a planned giving vehicle, it's not all bequests. It can be stock swaps, it can be appreciated stocks, it can be complex assets and property. We know that those nonprofits are the ones that grow at about a 20% faster than nonprofits that focus only on cash gifts. So if you're thinking about a nonprofit that's in kind of their midlife cycle and you're like, gosh, how do we become one of those big institutions within our community? You have to start talking about how you're accepting assets. And that then means, well, how are we being that sage to our donors and help guiding them through that decision to make a major donation to our organization and all the different vehicles that we can make that possible. So this is one of my resources from a colleague, and he talks about the nonprofit elevator pitch. Over at Trailblaze Creative. So we talk about that vision at the top. We don't really, if we're perhaps focused on animal rights or animal care, our vision is that there's no homeless animals in the world. But we know that we're not actually going to be able to accomplish that in our lifetime, but that's still where we want the world to be. And our mission may be that we provide shelter and food for homeless animals. And that's what we're dedicated to do. But even that can seem very abstract to donors. So then we get to our impact statement. And this is where quality management and fundraising really need to partner, because we need to come up with that one sentence line that really talks about what is getting done. So perhaps 100% of the animals that come through our programs find a safe home. Or 87% of the youth who enter our program have a report reduction in suicidal thoughts. Or 75% of the people we serve emerge from poverty within a year. So we need to partner together to find that one sentence that really illustrates what that impact is of our programming. And then the programs and policies beneath it are the how. We provide shelter, we provide spay and neutering, we provide food and job placement. That is all the how, but that's not really what you want to talk to people in an elevator. That doesn't stand out as differentiating yourself from other organizations. So when we're trying to do that differentiation from other organizations, what we're really talking about is the nonprofit value proposition. So if I am your ideal donor, why should I give to you rather than any other organization or at all? And every part of that sentence is really important to think about. If I am your ideal donor, well, who is your ideal donor? Why should I give to you, if at all, versus every other organization in your space or in your community? So what is unique about your organization's approach? What is it that you do best? What sets you apart? And all of that is really a partnership with quality management, right? So we sit down together and we say, why is our anti-poverty program? Why is our human rights program? Why is our breast cancer research? Why is what we're doing better or different or more effective than the other organizations in our space? Wouldn't we all love to be able to say, we are the only organization serving this need in our community? I mean, that would be great. I suspect very few of us can say that. because need has spawned, we've seen exponential growth of nonprofits over the last 20 years as well. So we know that there's a lot of either duplication of services or overlap of services, or organizations that are serving the same need but in different parts of the city. So with strong quality management and nonprofits partnering for nonprofits and fundraising partnering together, we can build that trust in donors, we can tell those compelling stories, and we can grow fundraising effectiveness to build a strong brand of impact, which really means we're going to raise more money, we're going to get further along in our mission, and we're going to be able to impact more lives, which is what we're trying to do. But that partnership is so key in both success from a program and mission perspective, as well as the fundraising effectiveness. I did want to flip the script a bit and talk about the metrics in fundraising, like how do we hold my team accountable? And there's a couple of resources here. The Data-Driven Fundraisers Reference Guide is a free download. Greg Warner runs this website called the Fundraising Report Card. And he can take the data from, you can take the data from your CRM, and it's anonymized. It's just your constituent ID or your TID number, and then gift date and gift amount. And then you might put in your campaign name if you want to compare different campaigns. It's just an Excel download, you upload it, and he comes back with all the dashboards like within 30 seconds. And you're really able to take a look at your trends year by year and figure out very quickly what are those trends in fundraising that your organization is experiencing. So some of the KPIs that I look for when I'm fundraising with an organization, we're looking at donor acquisition rates. We're looking at our lapsed donors or donor retentions. We have some reports called SciBunt and LIBunt, which means some year, but unfortunately not this year, and last year, but unfortunately not this year. We are actually approaching the last 8 weeks of our fiscal year. And so we're getting to that point where I'm starting to run those letters and double check that all of our donors have renewed their support this year. Our donation frequency, our one-time versus reoccurring. And these are all things that we look for. On an average donation, I definitely look at that when we're comparing campaign strategy year to year. So what did my spring campaign last year, my spring direct mail campaign average donation come in at? What did my spring campaign donation this year, that average, as well as my response rates and my donor retention rates. So those are all the metrics that we're using within fundraising to make sure that we're keeping pace and providing effective fundraising. So our last topic tonight is really, what do funders look for most in quality management? So I think for so long we worry about being honest with especially our grant writing foundations, if we didn't meet the goals of a particular program. I assure you that organizations have had challenges with programs before. I joke in my life, like, just tell me I'm not the worst, right? Like, tell me my house isn't the messiest one you've ever seen. And it's kind of the same way in fundraising. We're not the biggest mess that funder has ever seen. I assure you, if there is no impropriety, if you have tried your best and you've been honest and transparent with these funders, they've seen that before. They know that, especially new programs, that you tried your best, that you estimated, that you developed a program, that you had good quality data behind it. And yet, sometimes there are society factors that influence the outcomes that you had no control over, whether it's a social justice issue, or maybe it's an economic change in your community, or perhaps a crisis, either in your organization, a leadership change, or not. One of our local universities had their lead fundraiser suddenly pass away. You know, that's a big situation for our university to deal with. So be transparent with your funders, be honest with them when you've hit delays, when you haven't quite met what you expected to meet, or maybe the cost of providing services was more than you anticipated, more than you asked for. And so you either had to find other funding sources, or you had to serve less people in that grant because of that. They do look for you to be honest and to have those metrics and those quality management in place, so that you can tell them, yeah, we had challenges, but we figured out why. We've identified the communication challenge or the program structure issue, or we held focus groups and we did surveys and we heard from our families where we missed the mark, and we're able to improve that. We also, as an industry in the fundraising world, are really pushing back on this idea that we can move the needle on really big issues in a 12-month time frame. Because if we say this out loud, it doesn't make sense to us, right? If we're trying to solve world hunger or even hunger within our community, we know that hunger will not be eradicated in Pittsburgh within our lifetime. That won't happen. We don't have the systems in place. So the idea that we've moved the needle on it in 12 months, it really seems ridiculous, especially when there's so many other factors of the economy, food scarcity, inflation that impact that issue that our community is facing. So we are seeing fundraisers and foundations being able to say, that's we're making good progress, we're making impact, we're serving people, but we really can't have that impact over a 12-month time frame that we can measure for you in this grant report. And that's another place where quality management and fundraisers can partner, is helping me understand what those metrics are. Where are we measuring the need within the community that we're trying to address, and what are those trends, and what are those resources and sources that we're going to cite with donors to identify that we still have a need for our ongoing programming. Oh, Shobha, this looks like my little, this is me slide didn't quite get in there. So let me pull that up real quick. I don't know what happened. I had it. Shobha, do you want to start with questions while I pull up? I'll stop sharing and I'll pull up my little.
You know what you need to do. We are here.
Okay. So would you like to start with questions while I look for this?
Yeah. So I will stop recording now.